Hey, welcome to week 2 of Microsoft SQL. So this time we're going to change gears. So last week we did from a historical perspective, the bizarro thing of installing Microsoft SQL Server on top of Linux, which just for those people that have played with Microsoft products for a long time just feels bizarre. But it actually, as you saw, the actual installing SQL was really easy. It was one command once you had the package, and then you just had to configure it, and you had a SQL Server running on Linux. Now we're going to do 2 different types of installs this week of Microsoft SQL Server on top of Windows. A little more involved process. It's not that bad, but it has some definite caveats that you have to be careful of. So the first lab, we're going to install Microsoft SQL on Windows. And part of the thing about Microsoft SQL Server is it uses what's called service accounts. And in the lab document, I have the hard way to do service accounts using PowerShell. In the demo, I am going to show you a really cool, nifty widget. Will save you all sorts of times, and you probably will want to keep it somewhere in a software repository for future use out in industry. But it's not in the lab. So it's something that only in the lecture will I show you this little nifty tool to manage service accounts and create them really easily and fast. So the first lab, we're going to install Microsoft SQL on Windows using the GUI. The second lab, we're going to do a unattended install of Microsoft SQL Server using a script, which is very similar, except for the very last part where we basically go through the GUI, and right where you normally hit install, we stop. We take the file it has generated, we do some editing on it, we go to the command line, and we kick it off, and we're able to run the script that way. Where this comes really in handy is if you want to deploy multiple SQL servers identically, basically you've created a script, and you're able to take that script and bring it somewhere else and rerun the script and build another SQL server just like the first one. So it's a really cool way to be able to deploy Microsoft SQL Server. So we're going to go through the 2 different ways to install it this week. So the second lab, if it works properly, is going to go, the longest part is going to be actually waiting for it to finish, because it's a silent install. And if it works, it just comes back to a command prompt. And then you just have to look in the GUI to make sure that it's actually installed. If it doesn't work, which is where this lab sometimes goes off the rails for people, then you have to go in and figure out where in your syntax you made your error, and then fix that. And you get a lot of red PowerShell along the way with it basically erroring out. That this week's labs can potentially go pretty quick, but this is also one of the weeks that I've had people sometimes fight with these for a week to get through them. So it all depends. If you're careful on going through it, it goes pretty quick. Yeah.
My question would be, if you didn't like what you do, is it bad that you just go in it?
So the other issue, which is a good point to bring up, is that once you build these servers, which is going to be Romulus and Remus, I went on a Roman kick on this particular lab, that build the servers, snapshot them, then start it on the labs. Because again, remember with Microsoft SQL Server, when you're installing it on Windows, that if you partially install it, what's going to happen is it's going to try second time you install it, put a named instance instead of a primary instance, and then things get all squirrely. So the best bet is if it doesn't work the first time, whack it back to that snapshot you saved and restart. Especially when we get to the practical exam, that's going to be really, really important. Is what you want to do is make sure you have that nice, clean, known good state of your server that you can go back to if you need to. Because I have had people in the past try and rebuild a server during a practical exam, and that's just not a place you want to be. Okay, so SQL. So when we're setting up SQL, when we're setting it up on Windows, we get a whole lot of options. When we set it up on Linux, basically it was a command prompt, and we just said install, and it just did everything for us. So one of the things that you have is this idea of collation. And part of the thing with database servers, and there was a little piece that you had when you were doing RDS back in AWS that actually had this concept, is that when you first build the database server, you can define some settings, but once it's built, you can't go back and change it. And one of them for AWS back when we did RDS was encryption. Is that the only time you could turn on or off encryption is when you're building the database server, and then it's a setting. So collation is one of those also. And what that collation does is where you actually go through and say, does case matter? Because depending on what you're using the database for, a apple with a capital A and an apple with a lowercase a may be a different thing, or it may not matter. And so what you have to do is decide if that's important. Also, are you going to actually look at accent marks? Usually it's at, is it a US English centric use, or is this something that you're going to use outside of US English? If it's outside of US English, accents are going to be really important, because if you're dealing with Latin America or if you're dealing with Europe, all sorts of accents are going to potentially be in some of those database fields, and you're going to want to actually bring those in. So the default collation languages for SQL Server is you have CI, which means case insensitive. It doesn't care if it's uppercase apple, lowercase apple, it's the same thing. CS is for case sensitive. AS stands for accent sensitivity, so it actually looks at accents, and AI is accent insensitivity. So you can have it that you can set it up either way. Data directory tabs allows you to set data directory. So when we're installing SQL Server, remember we're setting up the second drive that's going to be our fat drive. Why are we setting up a fat drive? Why is it that we want to set up a fat drive with a SQL Server? What reasons behind that? Anybody remember? Now, it's not to have more space, it's to prevent something from happening. So the reason we're doing a fat drive is if we do thin provisioning of our drives with a hypervisor, then the hypervisor is baking out the OS by saying you have 100 gigs to work with, but only doing whatever they're using plus a little bit of overhead. By fat provisioning, we're saying you got 100 gigs, we actually are provisioning that full 100 gigs, you always had that 100 gigs to work with. Reason being, databases can write a whole lot of data really quickly to the database, faster than the hypervisor can actually scale that database out to give you more space. And if the database overrides the hypervisor, you corrupted the database, and everything goes blue, and you're going to have to go back to backups. So you don't want to have that. So you always want to have your database on a fatly provisioned drive. Yeah. Is your license, you're not responsive as in, what do you mean? Are they in the dreaded coma state? Black screen, or do they have a regular screen? Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things that can happen is it's what I like to refer to as VM coma. And what that is you need to change your power settings. Because the VMware by default, or Microsoft in their infinite wisdom, decided that power management was a good thing for a server. It's the most idiotic thing they ever put on a server OS, that I don't know why they did it. They carried it from the desktop OS. So what it should be is that a server, if you're running it as a server, should never, ever, ever power things down. You should have it that it locks the screen after a period of time, not turn off the screen. So what you want to do is go into power management on the VMs, turn off the power off screen, and then switch it to under power management, high performance. And those settings will make it so that your VMs won't all of a sudden be in this black screen state that you click on it, nothing happens for a while. Because sometimes what will happen is you actually have to reboot the machine, because it gets into this snip between VMware, the operating system, and the VMware workstation, and won't actually let you click. That's sort of with the VMware coma mode that I was talking about. But usually if it's black screen, you click on it for a little bit, it'll eventually go, oh, you want to do something, and wake up. But it's just really annoying when you're bouncing machine to machine like we're going to be doing, to have a machine go into a sleep state. So highly recommend turning that off. But yeah, so our data directory. So when we go to install, by default, SQL is going to want to install to the C drive. Well, we have our operating system on the C drive, which is thinly provisioned. We don't want to put it there. So when we go to install SQL, we're going to be putting it to one of those fat drives that we provisioned. So when you have more than one drive in Windows, what do you have to make sure you do to be able to use that drive? Anybody remember? So if you have a Windows server and X and you have two drives, first drive is going to be all set up by the operating system. Second drive isn't going to have anything done to it yet. What do you have to do in order to make that drive usable? Do what? Well, no, this is in the operating system. So in the operating system, you're going to need to go to Disk Tools, and you need to first find the drive and say, yes, I want to use that drive. And then you're going to need to initialize it. Then you're going to need to format it. Then once you have that drive letter actually showing up, then you're going to be able to install SQL to it. That's another place where people a lot of times forget that the drive isn't just there by default when you click in VMware and say add a drive, that you actually have to go through a couple steps in order to make that drive visible to the operating system. And we'll go through that in the demo tomorrow. SQL command. So we used the SQL command last week from Linux. So when we went with the SQL command and we made the database actually on the Linux server, we were using the SQL command. The SQL command also exists in Windows. So you can invoke it from the command line in Windows or Linux. You can use it from script files. You can use the SQL Server agent job step or PowerShell. So you have lots of different ways that you can actually invoke that. ODBC is the Open Database Connectivity, which is an open standard. And so with SQL Server, when you have a lot of applications and they're connecting to a SQL Server, the way they're going to connect from that desktop to that SQL Server application in most cases is going to be through an ODBC driver. And so let's say you had an application that was running your terminals downstairs in food service. And those terminals talk to a backend database server. What you have to install on those particular workstations would be an ODBC driver that's talking over port 1433 TCP to the database server. And then it just opens that up and is allowing the connection. For PowerShell, SQL Server, you can go into PowerShell, use the PowerShell tools for SQL Server, and then you're able to actually do anything that you can in the command interface through PowerShell. SQL Server Configuration Manager. So this is the one thing that's going to be different in Windows than it is in Linux. So in Windows, by default, SQL Server cannot talk to another server. TCP/IP port 1433 is disabled, and TCP/IP for SQL Server is disabled. So we're going to need to enable that when we actually install our SQL Server. The tool we're going to use is SQL Server Configuration Manager. SQL Server Configuration Manager is also where we're going to define what service accounts are running the SQL Server services. This will make more sense when I go through the demo on SQL Server install tomorrow. But SQL Server Configuration Manager is a tool you install. It has a little red toolbox. When you install SQL on Windows, there will be a little icon that has a little red toolbox. It's where you can stop and start the SQL Server service. You can stop and start the SQL agent service. You can change any of the startup parameters, so what account that service is running under. You can change the TCP/IP port. So 1433 is the default, but 1433 being the default, sometimes in some security parameters, that's a bad thing, so you want to actually change it to a different port. But all those can be configured on the server by the SQL Server Configuration Manager. Because again, you don't manage SQL Server's databases on the server, you're managing them remotely with SQL Server Management Studio. But the configurations, you're managing locally using SQL Server Configuration Manager. SQL Server Agent, talked about that a little bit last week. That's the widget that runs all of your jobs. If the SQL Server Agent isn't running, a whole bunch of stuff doesn't work. It's usually going to be the most common thing that your SQL Server is in a broken state because the SQL Server Agent isn't running. You may have noticed, or may not have noticed, that on your Linux box, by default, the SQL Server Agent is not running yet. And I'll go through tomorrow how to actually enable the SQL Server agent on Linux. Yeah, because what you'll see is that the top part of it looked great, and then on the bottom you'll see SQL Server agent not running. Oh yeah, well, part of it. One of the other things to remember with SQL Server, it's a lot like Linux in its mindset. You have your config state and your running state. Anytime you make a change to it, that's only the config state, and you have to restart it, apply it.
Yeah.
Yeah. SQL Server agent. So that's one of the ones that we're going to go through and change what account that is running under. Because part of the thing about Microsoft SQL Server, and this is part that sometimes people get really confused about, is that you have Windows security, and then on top of that, we're putting Microsoft SQL, which has its own security. And the actual application, the service accounts running the application, we do not want them to be system accounts. We want them to be specialized accounts to only do specific things we need to on that server, nothing else, and you can't log into the server with them. And so we're going to be setting up separate accounts that are going to run the SQL Server service. On our Linux box, that's part of what we were doing in Active Directory, is we set up that MS SQL account, and then we use that MS SQL account to then run the SQL service on the Linux server. And so that's what we were doing in that process, is making a special account that ran the SQL Server service, and that's all it did. And it was not an account you could actually log into the box on. We're going to do the same thing for the SQL Server agent startup account. And then on those accounts, and we'll do a live demo of this tomorrow, but in SQL Configuration Manager, or if you go to Services, you can get to the same screen. You will have one account you're running under, and that is where you can change that to this service account that we're going to set up. And then this is also where you set the service status. This particular one is running. You can do the stop start. And for the service, you can define how that's going to run. When we do group managed service accounts, we don't put anything in the password field. Active Directory actually will manage that for us, which is part of the cool thing about group managed service accounts. So the way a group managed service account, I'll back up. So the one thing about Active Directory is, so we have these special limited accounts that we want to run our SQL Server services under. So the problem with that is, if you used a regular old account and you had this fleet of 75 SQL servers, you'd need 75 accounts. No admin is going to create 75 accounts to run on well, very, very few admins would make 75 accounts to run on all these services on SQL servers. What most admins had done in the past is they created one account and they put that one account on all the SQL servers, and that was running those accounts, which then made a single vulnerability. If that account got owned, they could own all the SQL servers. So Microsoft came up with a tool, and then also, if you had to change the password, you had to touch them all, because the password was hard-coded on the services on each individual server, which is a royal pain, especially if you have to having to change that multiple times a year. So service accounts have this group managed service accountability. So you can create this special account in Active Directory that Microsoft Active Directory on a monthly basis changes the 28-character password automatically and syncs the keys with all the servers that are using it. So it changes that password monthly for you. You never have to enter it once after you've actually set it up, and it just takes care of everything under the covers for you. There's two flavors of managed service accounts. You have a regular managed service account and a group managed service account. The managed service account you probably will never use because you can only use it on one server. A group managed service account you can use on multiple servers. So if you need to have something in a cluster, like what we're going to be building, a managed service account wouldn't work very well because both cluster nodes need to be identical. And in a managed service account, you'd have two separate passwords, and that wouldn't work. So you need to use a group managed service account for that cluster environment. That'll make more sense when we go through the demo on that. Yeah, okay, yeah. So managed service account tool. So let me just show you this thing. that I've been talking about. Do a little demo land here. So for the lab, we're going to be building 2 new servers. So for lab 3, you're going to need to build Saturn. And then for lab 4, you're going to build Remus. So Saturn is going to be a 2019 server. It is going to have 16 gigs of memory, 4 processors, a 60 gig C drive, and a 40 gig D drive. The D drive is going to be thickly provisioned. So that's where we're going to put our database. Well, you can fix it. It's not too late. Okay, so Windows 16 or later. Yeah, the ISOs, pretty much all of your ISOs are going to be finding in the ISOs directory. That. Make sure you're putting it on the internal network. Yeah, as long as it's off, you can just right-click on it and say delete. Yep. Under manage. Okay, so I'm going to add another drive. That actually won't let me. Okay.
That should just be,
So-
you want that to be. And then go with.
So the first one is 60 gig thin, and then the second one will be 40 gig thick. Yeah, the two different, it doesn't matter which type of thick provision you're doing for what we're doing. If you're setting up something for production, sometimes your specs for your server may say which way they want it formatted. Yeah. Yep, we'll do that once it's spun up. Yeah. And then while that's spinning up, we're going to go back over to Mars, and we're going to go grab that managed service account tool I was talking about. So what we want to do on Mars is we're going to go and we're going to mount the class share. So right-click on network, map network drive, and again, that's our TARDIS. So it's / 10.10.0.190 / TARDIS. And then for you guys, it's student, and then the password that's student that I have up in Canvas. I can never remember off the top of my head. Okay, so then we go into our class share, and then you'll see SQL resources. And then what we want in there, oh, nope, not that one. Where did I put it? Thing. Okay, it's under SQL Lab 6, actually. We want this managed service account GUI installer. So we're going to want to grab that and copy that local. Bring it down to our download folder. select paste. Once it's in the download folder, we want to expand it. So extract all. And then run it. Before we run it, we do want to run one little step from the lab. Okay, so where you can find it under. Okay, so on TARDIS, in our class share, the CNTS 2213. I have it up on Canvas. So there's a cheat sheet on Canvas of how to access TARDIS. I have it in a nice paragraph of all the passwords and path and everything. So then it's under SQL Lab 6. And then it's Manage Surface Account GUI Installer. Yep, copy that, bring it local, then expand it. Don't install it yet. Then what we're going to want to do is we have to go to our lab document for Lab 3. And what we are going to want to do is there's a little part in here where it says SQL attended installation service accounts. And so this has the walkthrough of how to do it the hard way using PowerShell. We just need to do the first step on it before we use this tool. We need to do the get KDS root key, and then we're going to need to do the second part, which is we're doing a spoof, so it's not, we don't have to wait 10 hours before we can actually use this. So what we want to do is we're going to open PowerShell on Mars. So extract it, but don't install it yet. So just have it ready to install. Sure. Okay. I'll let people catch up. So I just have a PowerShell, elevated PowerShell prompt on Mars. And then once, let me know when you have your file extracted and are ready for the next step. Let's take a look. And Saturn, just jumping back.
And something.
Open PowerShell prompt. And then have your lab document open for Lab 3. So first PowerShell prompt, we want to get the KDS root key. And so what we're doing is we're grabbing an encryption key. Come on. And then second, what we're going to do is we have to, and this is the one that we're doing a bit of a spoof on it, is we're adding the root key, but we're throwing a negative 10 hours against it. And the reason we're doing that is by default, so the first one, we're generating a root key. And then the second one, we're taking that root key and we're saying the effective time that it goes into effect is 10 hours ago. Because normally what it does is you generate the root key and it needs to replicate across all of your Active Directory domain controllers. And the default domain replication period to make sure all domain controllers in the forest have it is 10 hours. Since we're doing it in a test environment, not a production environment, we're going to push this so that it actually happens faster, so that we can actually work with this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to paste that in. And then it just comes back and says, okay, we're good. So we won't take what?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, the copy and paste from Word into PowerShell and Windows works sort of, but you have to be very careful how it works. Okay, once we've generated that key, that's all we need to do in PowerShell. And then now we're going to go off the lab document a little, because what we in the lab document, it has us that we're going to create a group managed servers account. And we're going to create one called SQL exec. In the lab, if you follow along in the lab, you're going to go through a whole bunch of PowerShell to get this to work. We're going to do it the easy way. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this nifty little tool. So we downloaded the tool. Now that we have the key in Active Directory, we can use the tool. So go into the Manage Service Account Tool folder, double click to install it. Yeah. We're doing this on Mars. So this is an Active Directory thing we're doing. So we can actually have Saturn running in the background while we're doing this step. So this is one of those nice, you can do two things at once things. Okay, so we just take the defaults on the install. And then we'll want to launch it when we're done. And especially on your practical exam, this is definitely going to save you a whole lot of time using this tool. Using the PowerShell method is totally valid to do it, but it's painful and it's very error prone. This one makes it really, really easy. You launch the tool, you say new, you go, okay, I want to call this one SQL exec. And then we're going to say this is the count to manage, actually count running SQL service. Okay, and we're going to do a group managed service account, so group MSA. Select OK. Successfully created. And then it's going to say, okay, well, we created it, but it doesn't actually apply to any servers yet. And so we're going to have to come back to this tool once Saturn is built to actually say that this needs to be used for Saturn. And so right now we don't have any servers that can run it. So we can just select OK right now. So we have an account set up, but we don't have a server associated with it. Because any group managed servers account, you need to say what servers this is only going to be used for. Yeah. Yeah, you didn't hit the checkbox to launch it. So you should be able to just launch it. It should be in your menus. Yeah. Yeah. Any Windows server that you build, you always want to put VMware tools on there. Okay. And so click on start. There it is. Yeah. The thin. So the OS goes on the thin. The thick is where we put the database, because we want to, for the database, again, we want to allocate all the space so we can't override it. Okay, so Saturn in a happy spot. Yeah, it's getting close. Custom, next. What's it doing? Oh, did you go to your drive? That's fine. That's fine. Okay, click OK. So right click and do a power and either power off or okay, power on. Click into the window. Hit any key. There you go.
Did that.
You got to make sure you click into the window first. Really? Okay. Looks like it should work now. Nah. Okay. So I multitask as much as I can. We have to wait a little bit. Anybody else problems getting this far? Everybody got the GUI tool installed, got their base SQL exec account sitting there waiting for us to do next steps on it? Okay. SQL exec, SQL EXCC. Okay, 37%, we're getting there. Anything else we can do in the lab while we're waiting? Yeah, if you look at what the tool, the GUI tool that we had does, is it actually creates the security group, creates the group managed service account, and pretty much gets us to the point of getting all those pieces set up. And then the screenshot that we're looking for the local security group here on 3S1, what that would be on Mars is where you can find this, is if you go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, go into trantor.local, go into Users, or sorry, Manage Surface Accounts, and here is the account that you want to have that screenshot of. So where we went is we went into Server Manager, we went into Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, and then under Users and Computers, we have the trantor.local, which is our domain. And then under our domain, we have Managed Service Accounts. So you open up that window, and then you should see under Managed Service Accounts the SQL exec account that we just created. And that's the screenshot that you want to have for that 5S1, 3S1, or 3S1. And actually, the same screenshot using this tool will work for 3S1 and 3S2 since we're doing it without doing the PowerShell. If you did the PowerShell way, you'd have to have two separate screenshots. For 3S1 and 3S2, for both of those, you can use the same screenshot, which is just going to be Active Directory Users and Computers, Managed Service Account, showing SQL exec is up and running. And especially when we build the cluster, this tool is going to make your life so much easier. The thing to remember is because when we go to the cluster, we're going to build a new Active Directory domain. And just remember, anytime you have a clean domain, you do have to go through that first step of generating that KDS key and setting the time. So before your practical exam, you'll need to do that. Before we do the clustering lab, you'll need to do that also. So it's not there by default on any clean domain that won't exist. You have to do that step process. Yep. We're gonna jump back into the lab once Saturn is up and running. We just, while it was building, we're able to do a step over on Mars. So I just sort of did a multitasking step for you guys to show you the cool tool. Yeah, there is one when it generates. You mean the PowerShell? Yeah. When you generate the keys, those steps have screenshots as well. And all you're doing there is you're generating an encryption key, and then you're applying it to group managed service accounts. Yeah. Yep.
Do this on the 60 gigabyte.
Yep.
And then I go after this is fully built, then go into the settings and add it.
Yeah. So yeah, then we go to settings and add the second drive, which mine's just about at the point I can show you that. Yep, you're following along great. That would be a good thing. That'd be a good thing. Being here asking questions does wonders. Yeah.
Giving me a headache. Tried doing it again this weekend. It still does not like me.
Okay, and again, we're using password 01. For our system. Okay, so when setting up a machine, things that you need to do before you do anything else, you need to make sure you get VMware tools installed. We're going to need to make sure we go around the horn to do our configuration. So we need to turn off IE enhanced security, make sure that we set up the IP address so that we can actually get to where we need to. So first thing we want to do is we're going to turn off IE enhanced security. We're going to go into our IPv4 addressing, set that. Okay, so we're going to go back to our lab doc. Nope, you aren't going to be able to. And, yeah. Okay, so we're going to go in. Yeah, we're going to be a member of a domain, so time is going to work through the domain. Okay, so this particular one, our IP is .55. So it'll be 192.168.79.55. Oops. Come on. Come on, keypad. And then we're doing call gateway 192.168.79.254 because we're pointing it to our gateway server. Our DNS server, we want this one to point to what server first? Domain controller, because we're going to want to join the domain. So 192.168.79.100. If you don't point to your domain controller, you aren't going to be able to join it to the domain. Okay, so we got that one on the domain network, pointing to the right place for DNS. So it should be able to find the domain controller. Yep. Pretty much if we aren't using it, turn off IPv6. That's part of the normal thing. Nope, good asking. Okay, we're going to change the name of the server. So we want to change the name of the server. This one particular one is going to be Remus. Yeah, sorry, we are doing Saturn. I got them. I have both lab documents up. So this is Saturn. Not yet. Yeah, and transfer.local. And then it'll ask you to authenticate to Mars or transfer.local. And welcome to the domain. And that error was okay. Okay, and then we're going to restart later because we need to install our VMware tools. And then we'll do our restart. Install VMware tools.
Let me just make my thing faster.
Don't really have a way to make them faster right now, but
I would where? I'm saying it's just too slow. What do you?
well, I'm running one that's a little faster. So it's well, it would be one that you know you just have to be careful because I've had people try doing that, and the whole thing went squirrely on them. This is a known environment that I know works. For your world, I would say stay in the known environment that we know works. It might be a little slower, but it works. Yeah. Yeah. Because I have done these labs on VMware Workstation locally for night class, but when we get to the one where we're running 7 servers, it gets a little painful because then your disks. Yeah, well, it's because it's disk constrained, and then that gets really sort of challenging. Okay, so I got to pop under somewhere on this install. Come on, where? Yeah, I know it's running, but you aren't showing me it's running. There it goes. While we're waiting for VMware to decide what it's doing on the install, we can add that extra drive. So we're going to go to Settings, Add, Hard Disk, Next, Next, Next. 40 gig, allocate all disk space now, Next, Next, and then OK. So now that that drive has actually been attached, it's not usable. So if we go to our File Explorer, we'll only see under this PC a C drive. And then it's saying that our D drive is our DVD drive. So it's not saying that we actually have any drive space to do this on yet. So what we need to do is right-click on our Start button, go to Disk Management. Now VMware Tools decides to pop up. Okay, next, install. Okay, and then we'll see this disk 1 unknown showing up. So what we want to do is right-click on it, say Online. Right-click on it again, Initialized, and OK. Then right-click on the volume, New Simple Volume, Next, 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 Finish. Make sure you look at what drive letter it is using. That drive letter is where we're going to be installing SQL to. So you need to know, because most of you, it'll show up as your E drive, but it could show up as your D drive. It could show up as an F drive, an H drive. You'll need to know what drive letter actually that was set up as. Well, in this case, you'd have to change what drive the DVD is using first, and then you could change it to D. So that's just be aware of that. So once it's formatted, it's going to show up here so that you can actually see it under this PC. You will see the drive show up. So just make sure that you have your drive available before you try going through and installing SQL. And then as soon as we reboot, then we're going to be at a place that we're ready for our snapshot before we do any of the install process. So we're just about done with VMware Tools. Got our video driver. There we go. Going to force a reboot. Okay, so we added the extra drive, made sure it was thickly provisioned. We joined it to the domain. We made sure the drive was online, initialized, and formatted. So we have a blank drive, online and formatted. We've joined the domain, and our server is in a configured state, ready to start the install. So when we're at this point, once it becomes fully up, the other thing that you have to do the first time you log in is make sure you're logging into the domain and that you aren't logging in local. If you just log in right here, you're going to be logging in local. When you're installing Microsoft SQL, you want to make sure you're logging in as a domain account. So first time you log in, select Other User, Trantor, /administrator, and then the password. So we're wanting to make sure we've logged in as a domain account. Okay, this is the point where we want to then snapshot it. So right-click on Saturn, go to Snapshots, take a snapshot. Keep the firewall on. We're going to build these with the firewall on. Yes. Because that will.
I always get those two mixed up.
Yeah, because I enhance security, because if you open a browser, you'll notice it's on really quickly, because every time you try clicking anywhere, it says, warning, are you sure you want to go here? Put a security allow going to any website and any page. Which one? I enhance security, turn that off. That's just going to be a very annoying thing if you have to open your browser to do anything. It's another one of those things. Why they turn that on a server, I'm not sure, but. Nope, don't need to worry about any of those. IP address. Time zone, Active Directory is going to take care of, so you don't even need to worry about that. So yeah, I enhance security in your IP address, and you should be good. Then join the domain, rename, join the domain, VMware tools, reboot, power management, which I'm going to be doing in a second here. Come on. If it ever wakes up. Yeah, first time through after you've joined the domain will take a while. Yeah, you will. Yeah, you'll get that quickly. And time zone, you do want to make sure you're in the correct time zone. That was one thing I did neglect. You're going to be in Central Time. Yeah. What it should be is it should be in sync with whatever your domain controller's time is, because once you've joined the domain, it should pull time from your domain controller. No, Mars. Mars is your domain controller, so whatever time Mars has, what's the time zone that Mars is in? Okay. I'll come over in just a sec. Okay, we need to get that figured out before I go to the next step, so let's see what we got going on. time from the domain controller itself. Domain, the only important piece is parts. Okay. Okay, so now that we have that Saturn in a snapshotted state, we're going to go back to our managed service account tool, and now we can add Saturn to that managed service account. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into that managed service account that we had set up, click View Edit, and then what we want to do is Assigned Computers, the fourth tab. We want to edit Assigned Computers. We're going to add a computer, and we want to add Saturn. Check name. Okay. Okay. So now what we did is we affiliated that particular managed service account with the Saturn computer. So what that does is it gives Saturn an encryption key, so it's able to use that account without having to use a password. Yeah. Still saying the time is wrong. You can try. That's really bizarre. It might be that it's so far off that Windows just sync it. We don't have VMware tools installed yet, though. The screen looks smaller. But see if you can, and you should be able to right click on the time down in the lower right hand corner. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so now we have Saturn set up. We have Mars with the configurations. We have the group managed servers account. Now we're actually at a point that we're ready to actually start installing SQL. So time-wise, we're running good. So we're just gonna plow forward. So what we want to do is on Saturn, we're gonna go and edit our settings, and we want to mount the SQL ISO. So we're gonna go to our CD DVD drive, and we're gonna change which ISO we're associated with. So we want to go back to MS SQL and select SQL Server 2019 as the ISO we're associated with. Okay, so before we get to this next step, make sure you've snapshotted your Saturn server, because if this next step goes squirrely and you haven't done that, you're going to wind up having to rebuild the server, and it's just going to take a while to get that rebuilt. Okay. Yep. Yeah, what I did is I went into the Managed Service Account tool, and I just I selected the SQL exec, and then View Edit, and then went to Assign Computers and Edit Assign Computers. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So Saturn has been snapshot. We've mounted the ISO. Now what we want to do is we're going to go through and actually start the install process for Microsoft SQL. So mounting the ISO, because I knew you were talking that way and you were going to go, what do you mean? So you right click on Saturn, you go to settings, you go to DVD drive, We want to change the ISO image that's connected to the server.
Even though,
So what we want to do is change that to MS SQL and SQL 2019.
okay, even though
We've already installed Windows, so we don't need the Windows ISO anymore. So we're ejecting one DVD, we're putting in a new DVD. After. So after, because what you want to do is make sure you have a clean snapshot after everything's configured before you start the install. Yep. And so when the ISO is mounted, you will see a installer that has the setup and that we're ready for the setup. Anybody need me to hold off a little bit before we start the next step?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like 5 minutes.
Okay.
My VMware tool is taking a million years to install.
Did I lose anybody along the way, or is everybody following along okay? Yeah. What you got? First one, or is this? So we're at the very, are you just creating it for the first time?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did, like, Saturn is done, except for, I want to do this before I do.
Okay, yeah. So you don't, all you needed to do is the name and then what it's doing, and then you select OK.
But I don't need anything.
Don't need to worry about anything down there. And then it's going to say, what server do you want to associate it with? Okay. And then this is where we add Saturn. So as long as Saturn's already in the domain, we could add it, but I did it out of order because Saturn was still building. So that's why that was a little weird. And what you're doing is you're saying what servers can use this group managed service account. Yeah, yeah, yep. Okay. Oliver, are you ready? Okay. Oh.
I should be ready, like,
Okay.
restarting. Is there any, I add the hard drive, do I just do a change?
No.
Any of these?
Nope.
But, Transport dot admin, right?
Local. Trantor.local.
Transport dot local dot admin?
Or, oh, to log in?
Yeah.
Trantor/administrator. Okay.
So. That's it. But from my, like, faster, I have two notebooks available.
Well, it's running 2 Xeon processors, multi-core Xeon processors, so it has 64 gigs of RAM, so it's
Okay, so let's restart it. So I go to settings.
Yep.
I go into
DVD drive.
the then I
Yep. Yep.
my computer again.
Nope. Nope, you just go into my computer and find the installer, which will show up as a You just open the DVD and you'll see a setup.exe. It'll have a little green arrow on it. And then that'll bring up this prompt, SQL Server Installation Center. Okay, so SQL Server Installation Center is something that we're going to live in a lot for the next couple of weeks, because anytime we're doing anything with SQL Server for the install process, this is where you're going to run it from. So SQL Server Installation Manager, we're going to go click on the installation under the left. And we want to do a new SQL Server standalone installation or add features to an existing installation. So the top one. And so what it's going to first do, and this will be a part that it's going to say, okay, we're doing the evaluation, which is fine. Yep, and then accept the license terms, that's fine. Now it's going to run a check, and there's going to be a couple different steps here that you're going to need to follow along in the lab to get some screenshots. So just be aware that there's some screenshots along the way that you're going to need to select. Do not select Microsoft Update at this point. If you do, you're going to be here for about 45 minutes getting updates on your computer. So we're going to bypass that and let the updates happen later. So skip this screen. Yep. And so now what it's going to do is it's skipping the product updates. It's going to download the setup files, extract them, and get the setup files ready for the install process. So part of what it's doing is we're generating a script behind the scenes. It's not actually installing anything yet. What we're doing is we're generating a script. And then what we'll do with the GUI is we're going to actually then kick off the script. When we go to the unintended install, what we're going to do is we're going to take that script, modify it, and then manually launch that script. So there's a couple different ways that you're going to do it. So nothing is really getting changed on the system until we actually hit install. So as long as you have not hit install, nothing is written to your hard drive. Once you hit install, things are written to your hard drive. That's where you would have to go back to a snapshot in order to try doing a reinstall. Because removing SQL is ugly. You could cancel the install, take a snapshot, and then catch up.
After the install, take a snapshot.
Yep. Okay, so this is going to be one of the snapshots that you're going to, or screenshots that you will need for the lab, which is that the installation has gone through for the consistency validation, domain, everything is set up, and it's giving us a warning saying Windows Firewall is not set up properly for Microsoft SQL Server. So what we want to do is look at what that warning says. And it's saying, okay, the firewall is enabled. Make sure appropriate ports are open to enable remote access. Okay, we're going to do that later, so we're good. We can select next at that point. Okay, so let me pull the lab up and I can tell you what. Okay, so we went through. We haven't. Oh, okay. So that was I'll go back to that first screenshot. Sorry. Let me go back to. I'll just cancel out of mine. Okay. So what that was is that was under. Okay. So the part you asked about, which is in the lab doc, which I should be following the lab doc, and I'm sorry. So that was a system configuration checker, which is here. And what that does is that checks to see if your machine is ready to install SQL. And that's that global rules part. And then you click on show details. And then this is the screenshot that you're looking for that one. That was 1S1. So what that is that's making sure that your system is ready to install Microsoft SQL. For ours, I wasn't too worried about that. I knew it was in a good state. If you're running it on an older OS, or let's say if we were running Microsoft SQL 2022, then we would definitely want to run this because it's going to probably have us have to install some additional software before we could actually get it going. Okay, so once we have that check done, then we can go through our install process. Yeah.
System configuration checker.
Yep. Yep. Get us back to where we were.
When I was snapshotting, it wasn't letting me do it.
Ah. Okay. So the feature selection one is the one next place where people tend to get in the weeds. So we want on this one that we're going to select the database engine service. And then we want to change the instance root directory, shared feature directory, and shared feature directory x86. The problem is you can't point any of those to the root of a drive. So we're actually going to need to create a couple folders first. So what we want to do is we're going to create a Microsoft SQL. And if you notice, the root directory and the shared features directory can actually be the same. It's only the x86 that needs to be different. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to that new volume that we had created with that extra drive, and we're going to create two folders. And just call one SQL and another one SQL x86. Okay, so we have two folders that we created in our new volume. Yep. And then what we have to do is just repoint these to that new folder. So we're going to repoint the instance root folder, SQL, and repoint the shared features. And then the shared features to the x86. I'll be right over. Okay, so you should have yours looking like that. Okay. So right click on start. It's management. And then just right click. Right click again, Enterprise. Okay. Then right click and format on the drive here. New single volume, simple volume, and then next, and just go through the default. Okay. So you need to make sure you have the database engine service selected. That's one of the things also people on this screen sometimes forget to do. If you don't select that box, what'll happen is the SQL Server will install without SQL Server itself being installed. Yep. And then having your directories pointing to that new drive.
And it's okay that's telling me that Windows firewall or
Yeah. Yep. We're expecting that error because we're going to open up a hole for the firewall later.
and then
Okay.
database and services. Do I need to change anything else?
You need to change the root directory, shared feature directory, and shared feature directory x86. Yep. And for the other pieces, we don't need to worry about actually installing anything else. If you're doing something for a particular business, they're going to probably have other features that they're going to want. And those folders have to exist. You can't just point them to a non-existent folder. You just need to make 2 folders on your new drive that you made. Okay, so the next screen is where we get to the instance. So this is the part where we have that it's coming up the first install. This is the primary instance. If it comes up and only says that you can do a named instance, that means that you already have a primary instance on the machine, and that's where you're going to run into those problems. We're going to just leave it at the default settings here. We don't need to change anything. Select next. Yep. Yeah, you already got it, so you should be able to. Okay, so this is where that group managed servers account comes into play. So we are going to have our SQL Server service using that SQL exec account that we created. And so what we're going to do is here where it says SQL Server Database Engine, we're going to then select that. So the previous next ones, we just instance configuration, you just selected next. Okay. Come on. That one takes a little bit. Okay, so we want the SQL Server Database Engine. So where it says account name, we want to select that one, browse, and then make sure it says entire directory. It should say entire directory if you're logged in as a domain account. If you're not logged in as a domain account, it's not going to say entire directory. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to find that SQL exec account that we created. So if we do SQL, check names, we found the SQL exec, select OK. So it added that SQL exec account as what the SQL Server Database Engine account is going to run out under. We don't need to worry about the password because that's handled by Active Directory, and we're going to have it automatically start. We'll select next. You got an error. Why is that? Why did you get an error?
The validation on the page.
Click OK. Okay, and yours, click. We'll come back to getting that account set up on yours. Let me get through these couple screens, and then we'll see if we can get yours in a happy place. Okay. It might be that your group managed servers account isn't quite set up properly yet, so we just need to tweak that. Okay, so this next one, this is going to be a really important step. We need to select mixed mode. So what mixed mode means is we can use Active Directory or we could use SQL Server. And especially when we're first learning how to do SQL Server, having 2 ways to authenticate to your system is going to be really, really important. So the password we're setting here is the SA password. And again, Microsoft SQL Server, SA is that God account, that root equivalent account. So the password we're setting here is what you would use to log in as the user SA. And so make sure you remember password 01 is preferable. But only for this. The other thing that you want to do is, that's only on the Linux one. Because Linux wanted a more complex password, everything. Just be consistent. so that you can remember what password logs into what server. So for SQL Server administrators, these are who in the Windows realm is going to be allowed to administer this box. So what we're going to do, which is practice that you never ever do in production, but again, we're doing this in test, we're going to just say add current user. Normally you would have specific people who are going to be administering SQL or a group of people who are administering SQL that you would put in here. But we're right now adding the current user. And so what we have is we set up a password for our SQL SA account, and we have our administrator account set up as able to log into the SQL instance. Then we select next. And then this is the part where when we hit install, this actually goes through the install process. This is the magic button. Right now, nothing has been changed on our machine. All we've done is we've created basically a large text file that is saying how we're going to install this. Once we hit install here, then it starts moving files onto it. So we're going to hit install. And it's going to go through and start installing Microsoft SQL Server. Yeah, there's a couple screenshots that you do along the way here. But I should always say that Mhm. And then this will take a while. So we'll pick up tomorrow. Yeah. That file. I know it sometimes works. Yeah, oh. Yeah, take a picture of it. Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's when you're moving the file. So what you're doing is you're moving it from. So that means that you're probably. This is where you were mounting it. And then depending on what password you have for the administrator account on Mars, and did you make a share on Mars?
Oh, yeah. Major was shared.
Okay, so /temp. Oh, yours is lowercase? That one's uppercase. Okay. And that part, I'm not actually asking for any screenshots, and what we do later, we'll pick up, this is the important part there. Just a sanity check spot. Okay. Because you're having here that you can't get to the file in order to move it, is why it's doing the permission denied.
Yeah, but maybe file it. LS.
Oh.
Yeah, we had to do some really funky stuff. Yeah. Cause you got that way at Tom helping us.
Your administrator has full access.
CNTS.
Like, just. Yeah, minute.
Yeah, he has full right.
You got full control. Just remove it and back it.
So in the video, I walk through all the stuff you have to do on Mars for the DNS settings. Because what you have to do is there's a bunch of DNS settings you have to do on Mars to make it so that it actually finds it properly. And so what it is you have to manually add Vulkan's A record and create a reverse lookup zone for it. So if you go off of the Canvas page, because it's actually long enough that I did dropped it to YouTube. It's the lab 2. Yeah, I should have it. Yeah, because what it is there's a little piece of DNS stuff that you have to do on Mars to just make it so that Vulkan is actually, because Linux by default doesn't get posted back to the directory, so you have to manually create the records. And then once you do that, then the host will actually resolve properly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's how, I mean, that's how I did it. The other thing with make sure you're,
So you already get it.
Has it been moved already? You already do the move in?
What do you mean?
Are you doing the mount command?
Yeah, on the mount, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Okay, let's try going back to the. Well, let's go look at the actual. Let's go back to the drive location. Take a look at it. See if we can see it again. Okay, so it's there. So it's can't move it. Try instead of move, try copy. I believe it's CP. If I believe. Yeah. That works. You can't move it because with the move, because it's not allowed to delete it. What it's doing is when you move, you delete what's left. Copy it, you're just taking a copy of it. So that works. Yeah, it's one of those nuances of the file systems. Okay, what do you got there, Oliver? Yeah, that error. Okay, let's see if I can sneak by. Okay. So what we're going to go back to Mars. And let's back here. Yeah, we hadn't added the computers yet. So you needed to add that. Because what that does is says Saturn's now allowed to use that. And then now when we go back to Saturn. And back. Just querying it. Because what happens is the directory is managing the password.
Got it.
But it's only managing it for the servers that it's allowed to manage the password.
Okay.
And so that's what we do is sort of bless that. Valid. So we're going to go and browse. Okay, so it's actually, so because we did that after this had started, we just need to redo it. Well, it's not that hard though. Actually going to remember some of those settings because we started the config file. Just need to requery Active Directory. But yeah. Yep.
So I'm guessing tomorrow you're just gonna do lab 2?
Well, I'm gonna. Yeah. Well, tomorrow we're gonna get. So if you can have the server already installed for lab 2 coming into class tomorrow, then it'll make the unattended install part of it go faster. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Oh, yeah, that would make it so that you can't get to it. Okay, attendance code for the day, H34RTSQ. Hearts Q. Oh, sorry. There you go.
If we get all the labs done, then say we have to show up.
Nope. That's the magic of this part is once we get the labs done for the week, then you get your check-in and you're good. Well, we'll see how the scripted install goes tomorrow because this. Yep. Really? That's there. Yep.
This? Yeah, no, it don't exist. Yeah, just DP.
So instead of moved, we copied it instead of moved it. But not sure if that caused a problem later. It shouldn't. Okay, let's see. So /r,
Just wait to do the.
so let's just look in the local into that directory and see if we can see it. So the /var/opposite/MS SQL/secrets. And then do an ls. MS SQL.key tab. So it's there and it has the right name. Okay.
I wonder if I could just like.
Well, you're in the directory now, so
This will break my brain if I can. Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah, you can just get rid of the path and just keep the name. No, it should be. Yeah, so this is one of those. The good thing is, you know, just about enough things now that you're going, oh, here's another way I can attack this.
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I figured it out. It did not take any of my settings, so.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. After I run, try restart.
Okay, you are at one. And then it's coming back. Okay, so it's restarting the SQL Server service, which we will do down here, but you run that command first.
Okay, so don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I do. What do I put in here?
SQL exec, exec. Yep. And next.
Do not click that.
Nope. Yes. SA password. Add current user. And then next.
Good job. Everything next after that, or?
Just make sure you're following along because there's some screenshots along the way. Okay. Now I'm really escaping. Yeah, I had it up just a minute ago. I will put it up there again. That was the hearts queue. Yep. With so capital H 34 RTS capital Q. Okay.